Chinese customers, Chinese suppliers, Chinese businessmen, and it just doesn't work. And I think next week we're talking a little bit about how we adapt our Western business model to Chinese circumstances. And I'll be doing that presentation on basically how do we deal with Chinese consumers? How do we change our business model to adapt to these circumstances? So that again, what I encourage you to do is, Victor's one of our lawyers from our legal department. We were going to have the head of our audit team also, who's a very accomplished sort of auditor and forensic accountant. Unfortunately, he's had to go on a job with one of our joint venture disputes we've got going on at the moment with a US company, with a Chinese partner. And he was going to tell you some war stories, but Victor's got some great insight into what the Chinese think about how they see doing business with Chinese, with our Westerners. What are some of the major pitfalls? I'd encourage you though to ask questions or make comments. A lot of you have got experience. We were talking before about some of the experience in only a few months here. You've got experience on what are the issues on the ground. Ask questions, make comments, okay? Because I think that's the best way for this is to interact in these areas. Anyway, I'll leave it to you, Victor.
Just 1 second, I'm sorry. I forgot to introduce you.
This is
Richard
no problem.
and is the director of the Dezan Shira. Thank you for being here.
Not at all. I'll see you more next week. But yeah, a lot of insights into the, there's a lot of issues here. So let's be a lively bunch on this hot Tuesday morning. Wednesday morning. Okay, Victor.
Hello guys, and very nice to see you here and to give the presentation. And it's just a very brief introduction to myself. I joined Dezan Shira 3 years ago, and I've been working for the legal department of the Shanghai office. And before joining Dezan Shira, I was working for a Dutch law firm and also a Chinese law firm. And for our legal department, we mainly deal with legal matters, almost all legal matters, except for litigation or arbitration relating to foreign investments in China, including incorporation, merging and acquisitions, and due diligence, investigations, labor-related issues, and intellectual property rights, etc. And I got my law degrees in China, my bachelor's degree in China, and I also studied for my master's degree in Amsterdam before. And 2 weeks ago, when Mary gave me this topic, she said, okay, let's talk about how to do business in China. And I said, yeah, it can take you forever to talk about this. That's why, from the very practical legal point of view, I've selected 3 topics which dealing with which have to deal with the Chinese government authorities and the Chinese suppliers and customers, and also Chinese JV partners. I think some of you might already have some experience with the second topic. I mean, I heard about the discussion before the presentation, so just feel free to raise questions or discussion or enter into discussion during the presentation. And it's a very small group, so I think yeah, we can have more discussion during the presentation instead of just me doing talking. Yeah. The first topic is about how to deal with Chinese government authorities. I don't know what's your impression of the Chinese government authorities. Any idea, or have you got any experience dealing with Chinese government authorities? I think maybe at least the visa office.
Yeah, right. The visa office.
Yeah, I think in Pudong, I think all the foreigners, if you come to China, definitely you've been there before, and also maybe the public security bureaus. When you arrive in China, within 48 hours, you have to register yourself with the public security bureau. And but today I've listed some of the government authorities which are very closely connected with the foreign invested enterprises in China. The first one is called Commission of Commerce. In Shanghai, that's the name. Actually, it's just in the other building across the street. And they made in different cities, the names can be different. Some of them are called Economic Committee, Foreign Trade, and Economic Cooperation Bureau, Commercial Bureau, or Investment Bureau, depends on in which city you are. And for this authority, if you want to set up a foreign invested enterprise in China, it's the first one you are going to deal with. Basically, they will just look at the industry you are going to invest and check whether they fall into the encouraged industry, permitted industry, prohibited industry, or restricted industry. And they also look at your business plan, your investment scale, and they eventually approve whether you can set up your company here. And so basically, they are the approving authority for foreign investments in China. And after this, after the Commission of Commerce, after you get approval from the Commission of Commerce, you move on to the State Administration of Industry and Commerce, and in short, it's called AIC. And this authority is the registration authority. So you have to have your company, after the approval, you have to have your company registered with this authority. And apart from company registration, this AIC is actually they have very comprehensive administrative functions. For example, they also deal with advertisement in China. They also deal with enforcement of intellectual property rights. So quite a few things they take care in China. And the next one, after you set up a company, very shortly you'll be required to deal with the tax bureau for tax filing and for buying FAPIAO, and also for if a foreigner you're receiving salaries in China, probably you have to deal with the tax bureau for your individual income tax. And yeah, these three, they are the most important government authorities for foreign invested enterprises. And also depends on your industries, like what kind of business you are doing in China. You may also have to deal with the customs for trading companies. And maybe, to me, the tax bureau and the Chinese custom, they might be the most complicated government authorities in China. A lot of complications and sometimes not really transparent. And if you open restaurants, if you open bars in China, probably you have to deal with SFDA. They have the catering license for restaurants and bars. And SFDA, they also cover a very big range of industries. Sorry, it's abbreviation for State Food and Drugs and Administration. They also deal with health food, medicine, medical devices, etc. And visa office, I've just mentioned. So if you want to apply for your residence in China, you have to go there. And also your company, if they hire Chinese employees, you have to deal with the labor bureau, with the contracts, social insurances, housing fund, and also for yourself, work permits in China. Last but not the least, I would also like to talk about the banks in China. Banks, normally they're not government authorities, but a lot of banks in China, the good ones, they have the state background. And maybe you've already started dealing with the banks quite often. And the banks in China, they are a little bit bureaucratic. And the rules in banks in China might be quite different from the rules of the banks overseas. And sometimes the procedures are very complicated. They're very, very rigid. And also sometimes their requirements can be very unreasonable. So I also want to talk about the banks here, just because they're not a government authority, but sometimes they behave like government authorities. So have you got any problems with the government authorities before, like what I've just mentioned? Or with all of them. Yeah, basically, I think no matter where you go, there are always problems. Even if you operate legally, they can always bring you questions.
You cannot operate legally in China. There is no way. If you want something to success, you cannot operate.
You can't, or you can?
You can't.
I mean, a lot of people work in the grey area here, though. I mean, there's a lot of grey stuff going on. You know, whether that's illegal or not illegal is China doesn't really see things in terms of legal and illegal. Sort of grey is okay, but I mean, we would always recommend someone goes into it legally. But yeah. You're going to get caught eventually.
That is a very big problem for foreigners because we always try to be on the white side.
Yeah.
And there is when we stop all the process. So we usually, I think, that is good to throw a Chinese person to do all those kind of things, and they make the great things.
Yeah, but still, I mean, like, it's just a risk whether your company is going to take such a risk by doing this.
I mean, it isn't a level playing field, and this is one of the big problems for operating in China. If you're a foreign company, you're behind the eight ball. Both you can't get away with things that Chinese companies can, particularly in tax areas, in HR areas. You can't compete on that level playing field, so the pricing structure is not as transparent. I mean, it's a difficult area, quite frankly. And I mean, The customs are probably the hardest people here to deal with, you know, by a mile. Even Chinese companies don't like dealing with customs. I mean, Victor, you might want to just talk about some of the dealings with the AIC. I mean,
Yeah.
they tend to be a bit fairer, particularly in Shanghai. But as you move outward of Shanghai, it gets a little less sophisticated out there.
We'll talk about in the next slide. So, COC, Commission of Commerce, AIC, and the Tax Bureau, they are the most difficult ones, and they are the most important ones for foreign invested enterprises in China. So, how do you deal with them if you have problems, if you have troubles with them? And for COC, actually, it's approving authority, like for foreign investments in China. Like in Shanghai, it's very independent. They just do the approving, they have the power to approve the incorporation of the companies. They are very strict, and because for Shanghai, the foreign investment is already quite mature, so they are not very desperate for foreign capital to come into this region, and they are being very selective on investment with quality. But if you move to second tier or third tier cities, that's why they have different names, because in these cities, the Commission of Commerce, they're actually combined with the Investment Bureau. So they also have the function of attracting foreign investment into that region. If that is the case, they can be really helpful with the incorporation and approving of the foreign invested enterprises. We've got some, because our Shanghai office, we deal with clients in Jiangsu province, Zhejiang province, and also Shanghai. Like in the north or in the south, if you get if you establish really communication or cooperation with the COC, Commission of Commerce, and sometimes they can even help you with location search, help you with looking for local stuff. So they can be quite helpful. And for AIC, they do not attract foreign investment. They actually supervise on the operation, registration of the companies. So they're not as flexible as COC. They're very strict. They have very strict compliance with the laws and regulations. So, and according to our experience, we've dealt with this AIC in different cities, and generally speaking, they're very strict. And but like Richard said, still Shanghai, maybe they have very high requirements for the companies. But if you move to second tier, third tier cities, they're always negotiable. And for Tax Bureau, I think it might be the most difficult government authority to deal with. Sometimes they're not very transparent, they are very arbitrary, and they have a big discretion when they rule on the companies in its region. But still, I think it depends on how big contribution you make to the Tax Bureau. Sometimes I know some of our clients, they have very big manufacturing plants in the suburb of Shanghai, and the Tax Bureau, they're very happy with them because every year they pay a lot of tax to the Tax Bureau. So they can also be very flexible. It depends on how much contribution you can make to them. But generally speaking, they're like AIC, very strict with the foreign invested enterprise, and normally they have higher requirements for foreign companies than Chinese companies.
The tax system here is quite different to what we expect in other more developed countries. There's virtually no central authority here. There is a state authority, but it basically has no power at the local level. Each city basically runs its own tax system under the broad rules put in by the federal government here. So there's great discretion at local level, and basically everything's done by a local level, one guy, the tax officer, who's assigned to your case. And he can do anything he likes. And basically he makes it up as he goes along. And it's ambiguous, it's arbitrary, there are no rules, and there's basically no right of appeal either. You do have a right of appeal, but if you do it, you're dead. You're not going to win it ever. So it's very difficult. You've got to keep this relationship with this guy on an almost social basis. We don't really see much bribery in that sense, although you do hear reports coming out of the country areas a bit more. But you've got to keep up a relationship and basically keep him sweet, as it were. The biggest area where this company has problems is in withholding tax, which is basically a tax where money's being sent out of the country. And they have arbitrary, basically if it's over certain levels, you've got to get a tax clearance certificate, and basically the rules on what you pay are very different, and sometimes it's 5%, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 20, and depending upon what's going on. Probably the biggest issue that causes foreign companies sending money out of the country, and this is with the area that causes the most problems. The other thing to note is that China gets most of its revenue from VAT. Okay, so about 70% of all Chinese revenue the government gets is from VAT. Very different than the West, where it's a mixture of VAT or sales tax of some sort and corporate income tax. Here it's very much skewed towards VAT. No one pays corporate income tax. No one pays very little individual tax here. So what the government here, their main resolve is to protect the VAT revenue. So this is the area they look at the most. So you get your VAT compliance right, and basically they'll leave you alone. But if you start doing dodgy or wrong things with VAT, that's when they hit you hard. So if you're looking at situations, particularly when we're dealing with fake fapiaos or cash transactions, that's a real danger area. And what we advise our clients to do is get your VAT right. That's the most important thing, because if they catch you doing anything dodgy with VAT, then you're going to have a lot of problems, okay?
And yeah, like I've just mentioned in the previous slide, the banks in China. And so which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the international banks or the local Chinese banks? For international banks, of course, they can provide better services, but I still have to say, with that there is quite a few foreign banks in China, like in Shanghai, like HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Citibank. According to our clients' experience, still we have to say like the services of the foreign banks in China are not comparable with their overseas, with their headquarters. So don't expect that you can get the same services as you get from overseas. You're in China; it's a little bit different. And
you have to create a Chinese account in those banks also.
You mean for the foreign banks?
Yes.
Yes, you can open Chinese bank. You can open
can
bank
or
account.
you must.
No, you can. You can choose.
Okay.
Because for your company, you can choose either to open the bank accounts in international banks or the Chinese banks. So it's an option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've heard, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I've heard that if you have, let's say, HSBC in, I don't know, Hong Kong or wherever, that account doesn't link into the account in China, so you cannot do much stuff from your account there here in
No, they're
Shanghai.
separate.
There's no connection
separate.
between, let's say, HSBC Hong Kong and HSBC China. There's literally no connection. It's almost like they're
Exactly.
separate banks, which is crazy.
Yes.
But it's the same with any operation in China. Even a branch of Bank of China in Shanghai has no link to the branch of Bank of China in Beijing. They're separate banks.
But that also
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
with the branch of Bank of China in Pudong and the branch of Bank
Absolutely.
of China in Puxi.
They're different banks, yeah.
They're
It's
different
crazy.
banks. If you try to open an account in Pudong,
No.
and then you go to Puxi and you try to make any kind of transaction, they're going to tell you go to the branch, you
No.
open the account.
And
The rates are different.
they're
The rates are
We were
different.
trying to open an account, and we went to Pudong, as he said, and we were checking something in Hong Kong, and the rates are totally different. Like all the fees for maintaining the account and everything is totally different. We're in the same bank.
Yeah, and also in some of our relocation cases, I mean, we were in different, even from one district to another district to one city to another city. We tried to move the bank accounts of the company, but they're still like they're not even willing to communicate internally. So the company has to do all the work for themselves, because I think they are called the same bank, but they are not really connected with each other.
Something that really happens is, for example, if you open a bank account for the company in a Bank of China, Chinese bank, and then you try to make a transaction to send money abroad, you have to do it just from the bank you open the account. You cannot make it from any other branch. So, and usually that is the main branch or is the headquarters. So, for example, Bank of China headquarters is in Yan'an Road, I think. And if you try to send money from Pudong, you cannot. You have to go to that bank.
Yeah,
it's very
because
weird.
it depends on where you open your bank account. You cannot like internally transfer your bank accounts from here to there. if you open there, it's just there.
This is why some of the Chinese banks, the big four, are superior because they have a branch network. Very few, apart from HSBC, Standard Chartered, don't really have a branch network at all. So if you have got to continually do foreign exchange transactions, you've always got to go back to your branch. And if you can, of course you're not close to a branch, then it just adds time. In the retail network of the Chinese banks, it makes it much easier to deal with. However, the culture of the Chinese banks is just appalling. I mean, to get anything done is just crazy. I mean, their online platforms also are pretty bad, whereas the foreign banks, their online platforms are getting better. The major issue, you can choose an international bank as a foreign business operating here, no problem, except for one reason, and that is if you want to pay your tax electronically, and the tax department want you to pay tax electronically, and that I mean VAT, income tax, corporate income tax, you've got to use one of the big four Chinese banks. So you might be able to use HSBC for your foreign exchange account, for your renminbi account, but you've always got to open up a tax account with a Chinese bank. And this makes it difficult because you're dealing with different banks. So a lot of people are tending towards, let's say, ICBC or BOC for all their accounts. But then you've got to deal with the culture. But I deal a lot with HSBC internationally and China, and I tell you, HSBC China is not an international bank at all. It's a Chinese bank with a better name. That's about it.
Actually,
And higher fees also.
Higher fees.
yeah, and also for these banks, normally they have the threshold for opening bank accounts. Basically, you have to make commitments, like how big your investment is going to be and how big the cash flow is going to be. If you can't fulfill these kind of requirements in the future after you open the bank account, they'll charge X fee for that.
And they give you discounts also. If you make a number of transactions, you can avoid some fees from the banks.
Yeah.
Depending on the transaction they do.
So we had quite a few problems with HSBC Shanghai for our clients as well. So clients are not really happy with that.
So the key question: which one of those Chinese banks do you recommend?
Still the big. I think still the big four: ICBC, Bank of China. I think for Bank of China, they have their staff. They can speak English. I think maybe that's the best bank for bilingual services. And for ICBC, the procedures are comparatively easier and very easy to deal with the staff. And also for, I think, China construction banks and agriculture banks, not really, because it's more related for agriculture industries. But
Bank of Communication.
The Bank of Communications is good too.
I've been doing this investigation about the fees. Bank of China is one that have the highest fees.
Yeah, they're expensive.
The highest fees. Yeah. And compared with the other ones, maybe 30-40%. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the difference between the fees is big. I found this merchant bank that it's a new bank.
Yeah.
It's a really friendly bank, and the only platform is okay, and the fees are acceptable. But I don't have any concept from Chinese banks.
The China Merchants Bank are regarded as the best foreigner-friendly bank. Their online platform is quite good.
Yeah.
It's in English. The problem is that they're so popular.
Yeah.
It can take 2 to 3 months to get an account set up.
Yeah. we were trying.
Yeah, no, 2 to 3 months to get a bank account set up, which is just crazy. I mean,